If you're in a second marriage, there's a good chance your estate plan is set up to accidentally disinherit your kids, and you may not even know it.
This video is for educational purposes only. Always consult professionals before making legal, tax, and investment decisions.
So here's the uncomfortable truth. Blended families create planning challenges that most estate plans simply don't address. It's not that the challenges can't be solved. Absolutely they can, but most people don't even know the questions to ask.
And what we see over and over are good people with good intentions whose plans fall apart because nobody walked them through the scenarios. So today, we're going to talk about exactly how accidental disinheritance happens and what you can do to prevent it. Let's use an example everyone can relate to. Remember the Brady Bunch? Some of the younger generation may not. But Mike Brady marries Carol. He's got 3 boys. She's got 3 girls. They blend the family and live happily ever after. Now, let's think about what happens when they need to do the estate planning.
So here's what we typically see. Mike's will says, I leave everything to Carol. If Carol's not living, I leave everything to my 3 boys. And Carol's will says, I leave everything to Mike. If Mike's not living, I leave everything to my 3 girls. Sounds reasonable, right?
But something that we see more often than you might think. So that's all fine until you think about what actually is probably going to happen. So let's take an example. How about if Mike dies first? Mike dies first, everything goes to Carol. Now Carol has all the money. And her estate plan leaves everything to her 3 girls. Well, what about Mike's boys? They get nothing. Not because anybody planned it that way, but because nobody thought it through.
Here's where it gets even more complicated. What if Mike and Carol die in the same accident and Mike actually dies 8 minutes before Carol?
Yeah, legally, Mike's money could transfer to Carol. Then as Carol's estate plan kicks in, everything goes to the 3 girls and Mike's boys are completely disinherited, not because of intention, but because of bad timing.
Or consider this. Carol lives another 20 years after Mike dies. She becomes old and maybe infirm. And the people who take care of her in those final years, maybe it's one of the girls, maybe it's a caregiver, they become close to her. She changes her will. The boys end up with nothing. Maybe that's what Mike would have wanted, but maybe it isn't.
The point is that without proper planning, the outcome could be dictated by circumstance, by the order of death, by who's in the room when the decisions get made. And to us, that's not a plan. That's an accident waiting to happen.
So here's something we see all the time. The couple has a handshake agreement. Mike says, Carol, don't worry. If I die first, you'll take care of my boys, right? And Carol says, of course I will.
That's a napkin plan, and it's not enforceable. It's not documented, and it doesn't account for what happens if and when the circumstances change. So what if, let's say another example, what if Carol remarries? What if her financial situation changes? What if she simply forgets or her kids convince her otherwise? I mean, the further in time from the moment of Mike's death, the greater the chance that Mike's kids aren't going to get anything.
Good intentions do not survive the legal system. Only proper planning does.
But if you're realizing your estate plan might have gaps like this, or you're in a blended family and nobody's ever walked you through these scenarios, consider subscribing. We cover the stuff that most advisors simply don't feel like talking about.
So how do you solve this? The good news is there are real solutions. You just need to think through the scenarios and structure things accordingly.
Well, step 1, honest conversation. Communication is the most important. Mike needs to ask himself and Carol, how much do I want my kids to inherit? Regardless of what happens to Carol. That's the starting point. I mean, what if Mike gets hit by lightning that afternoon, right? We have to consider that scenario. That's the starting point. Not everything goes to my spouse and we'll figure it out. A specific number with a specific intention is what makes the most sense.
Yeah, so once you know that number, you can build a plan around it.
Let's look at options. Option 1, life insurance, black and white. Let's say Mike wants his boys to inherit $1 million no matter what. He buys a life insurance policy for $1 million with the 3 boys as beneficiaries. When Mike dies, that money goes directly to them, income tax-free, and in our state, inheritance tax-free. It doesn't pass through Carol's hand. It doesn't depend on what happens to her estate. The kids get the money. The boys are protected. And they may not care what happens to the rest of the money after that.
Another option is a trust.
And Mike could put money into a trust that provides, let's say, income to Carol for the rest of her life, But what she passes, the principal goes to the boys, or even to all 6 kids. It's called the marital trust or a Q-tip trust. That money supports the surviving spouse, but it doesn't get absorbed into her estate. And again, the kids are protected.
Or you can structure it to sprinkle money to different people at different times. Maybe some goes immediately to Carol, some goes to the kids now, some gets held for later.
The point is this: there are a lot of options. The question is, what do you really want to have happen? And I think more importantly, has anybody ever asked you the question?
So here's where we come in. As your personal CFO, within our virtual family office framework, our job is to ask the questions that prevent surprises later.
Yeah, questions like, what do you have happen if you die first? What if your spouse dies first? What if you die at the same time? Do you want your stepchildren to inherit anything? Does your spouse feel the same way? Have you actually had these conversations, or are you just assuming?
How much do you need to protect your kids regardless of what happens to your spouse? And how much do you trust your spouse to honor your wishes after you're gone?
These aren't comfortable conversations. Nobody likes to have them, which is why there are more mistakes. But they're necessary, because if you don't answer them now, the legal system will answer them for you, and you may not like the result, even though you're not going to be around to.
So here's another wrinkle that people don't think about. What if one spouse comes into the marriage with significantly more money than the other?
And I think that's relatively common. So let's say Mike has $3 million and Carol has $300,000 and they get married. What happens is Carol's lifestyle naturally changes. It usually changes dramatically. There's usually a bigger, if you remember the Brady's house, it was quite nice. They had nice cars. They took vacations. They went to Hawaii and the Grand Canyon, and they get used to a certain standard of living. And if Mike dies first and everything goes to Carol, his kids might be fine with that. But what if he doesn't? What happens to Carol?
And flip it around. What if Carol is the wealthy one and Mike is wondering, what are my needs if something happens to her? Will I be able to maintain this lifestyle? Will her kids resent me? And that's often very...
Yeah, it disrupts family dynamics. But these are the situations that create real tension if you're not addressed. The goal is to think through both sides. What if things go right, and what if things go wrong?
So here's what ties it all together. Your will is only one piece of the puzzle. You also have beneficiary designations on retirement accounts, annuity and life insurance policy, and transfer on death accounts.
And annuities, things like annuities. So all of these things have to work together. If your will says one thing and your beneficiary designations say another thing, the beneficiary designations supersede and override what the will says. We've seen it. We've seen ex-spouses inherit retirement accounts, not because anybody wanted that, but because nobody updated the paperwork after the divorce. Can you imagine?
Yeah, can you imagine that? Your ex-spouse gets your hard-earned money. Your current spouse and kids don't get anything because of a form you forgot to change.
Yeah, that's accidental disinheritance, and it's completely preventable if someone's coordinating all the pieces.
Let's be direct about what we're trying to avoid here. Trying to avoid surprises, hurt feelings, and in worst-case scenarios, lawsuits.
Yeah, we've seen families torn apart because the planning wasn't clear. Kids fighting with step-parents, siblings fighting amongst each other. Years of relationships destroyed over what could have been distributed fairly if anybody had just thought it through.
The goal isn't to be morbid. The goal is to be thoughtful, to have conversations now when everyone's healthy and thinking clearly, to put a plan in place that reflects what you actually want, not what happens by default.
If you're in a blended family or a second marriage, the standard estate plan probably isn't enough. You probably need someone who will ask the hard questions, someone who will think through the scenarios, someone who will coordinate the wills, the trusts, the beneficiary designations, all of it, so nothing falls through the cracks.
So most people get this. They want to take care of their spouse. The question is, how do you take care of your spouse and make sure your kids aren't disinherited? How do you make sure everyone is treated fairly?
Well, that takes thought. Most importantly, conversation, and then proper planning. But here's the thing. Getting the documents right is only half the battle. The other half is making sure your family actually understands the plan. That's where the family meeting comes in. And it's the most underutilized tool in estate planning, and it's probably the most important. In the next video, we'll show you exactly how it works and why families who do it never regret it.
So if you're sitting there thinking, we need someone to help us figure this out, to facilitate these conversations and make sure nothing gets missed, we'd be happy to talk. Click the link below to schedule a conversation.
Because at the end of the day, investing is the easy part. Making sure your blended family is protected, that's the hard part.